Because I think one of the things that I was thinking about Orwell and language, you know, a lot of people think when you look at Orwell's writings on language, that it can seem, and some of the kind of very self-conscious claimers of Orwell's mantle, sometimes I think abuse what he said and use it in a kind of pernickety way that's unhelpful. But I think one way you can really see how what Orwell says about the importance of language and concepts and understanding them is really if you look at the way we talk about multiculturalism at the moment. Because this is a really important example where language informs policy and has a terrible effect on real people. Whenever you talk about multiculturalism, firstly it's been mixed up with other concepts. So for example, on the right you always get multiculturalism and mass immigration, there's a phrase, you know. Well, they're completely separate things. I'm in favour of mass immigration, I'm a product of immigration, I believe we should be taking more refugees and more immigrants in this country, but I'm opposed to multiculturalism. But the problem is we've got into this kind of gloopy sense of language around multiculturalism, where what people think they're saying when do you like multiculturalism? They think you're saying, do you like immigrants? Do you like, you know, chicken tikka masala? Do you like, you know, and so on. Well, yes, I love all those things. I'm passionately in favour of them. But I think a terrible way to greet immigrants to your country is to say, hello Muslim, we will now put you in a box labelled Muslim, and this reactionary imam will now be your spokesman. This reactionary imam who you haven't chosen, you don't know anything about. And one of the things that the judges looked at was a piece I've written about how this can lead to a terrible situation where multiculturalism, the idea that immigrants should be encouraged to retain the culture from which they came, irrespective of what we think of that culture, and irrespective of what the individual immigrants may think of that culture, is, I think, why that's very dangerous. If you look what happened in Germany, there's a series of court judgments. Germany has after the invention of multiculturalism in the 60s, actually by the right, because they didn't want immigrants to integrate, specifically they wanted them to stay, retain their culture and go home. The Turkish Gastarbeiter and the Dutch, Jonathan Sachs, the chief rabbi, has written about this very well, that history. They integrated into the constitution that you have to respect the religion and culture of other people, any religion and culture. So there's this extraordinary string of cases in just a couple of years ago, where the most striking example for me was a series of court judgments against Muslim women, which I thought was really striking about multiculturalism. A woman, I remember her first name was Zainab, I don't think her surname was actually released, was being beaten by her husband, really viciously beaten. She was a German-born woman, but her parents had been, I think, Algerian. And she was being viciously beaten by her husband. There was no dispute about this. He'd gone to prison for it, police had done him, absolutely without dispute, and he'd beaten her children as well. And so she went to court to get an annulment, because in Germany you have to be separated for 2 years before you can get a divorce. And she wanted it sooner because she just wanted this guy out of her life, she didn't want him harassing her. And she went to the judge and she explained all this, and it seemed like an absolute open and shut case. And the German judge, who was a German woman, shockingly came back and said, well, I've listened to your case, clearly you are being violently abused, but the Constitution requires me to bear in mind your culture and religion. And she read out the passages from the Quran which recommend domestic violence if your wife gets uppity, and said, well, I'm afraid that's your culture, and it's basically what you should have expected, so I won't annul this marriage. There was a case of a similar case of a young German woman whose parents were Turkish, who got a boyfriend, a German boyfriend, and was sleeping with him and doing all the other things that young German girls and young women, when they're free, want to do everywhere. And her family murdered her, and it was an absolutely premeditated murder. And the judge, so-called honour killing, which is a term I think is disgusting, and the judge lowered the crime from murder to manslaughter, and he said he was doing it because the words he used were, I understand that this woman, i.e. the victim, offended your Anatolian moral precepts. And the last case, which I think is equally less serious, but I think as revealing, there was a case of a 14-year-old Muslim German girl who wanted to go on a school trip, I forget where, but it was somewhere. It was more than 50 miles away from her parents' house. And in the Quran it says that you can only travel as far as a camel will take you in a day from your father if you're a young girl, and it was further. So her parents forbade her to go, and the girl wanted to go. This was, she wanted to go. And the school bravely went to court to get the permission for her to go, and the court denied it, and the judge said, well, we don't allow we require mentally disabled people to have companions. I don't see why Muslim girls should be any different. So you end up with this bizarre situation where people who believe I'm sure that judge thought he was being very liberal and very tolerant of Muslim culture, with this bizarre situation where, in the name of tolerance, you end up treating Muslim women like the mentally disabled, or condoning their murder, or telling them to stay with violent men. Which obviously begs the question, well, whose culture? It's not, it's the problem with multiculturalism, the way we frame it is, we assume there is a thing called Muslim culture. Well, there isn't a thing called white culture that puts me with Richard Littlejohn and Nick Griffin. And there isn't a thing called Muslim culture that puts those women with the imams who want to oppress them. There is a conflict there. They have quite different cultures. This shows where actually concepts are very important, and language. Because when most people say they support multiculturalism, what they mean is they want people to be able to live however they want to live, as long as it's not harming anyone else. Well, that's what I'm passionately in favour of, but there's already a philosophy that allows that. It's called liberalism. The problem is, multiculturalism is not liberalism. Multiculturalism implies that groups have the right to break away from the rules of liberal society. The problem is, if they just wanted to break away and, if someone wants to go and sit in a mosque all day, or sit in a church all day, or sit in a synagogue all day, well, I'm going to disagree with them, but they've got absolutely the right to do that. But that's all right under liberalism. The danger of multiculturalism is, it's not them exercising their rights as individuals for themselves. I'm entirely in favour of that. It's them exercising their rights over other people, usually women. So this is where I think a good kind of Orwell style example of why linguistic precision is so important. Because if we just take multiculturalism as a kind of woolly, hey, anyone can live how they want to live way, well, of course I'm in favour of that. But that is not how multiculturalism is used. That is not what multiculturalism means. What we need to argue for in place of multiculturalism, which is people in sealed boxes policing each other as communities, what we need to argue for is liberalism and miscegenation. Multiculturalism tends to lead to separation. What we actually need is miscegenation and hybridity and people meeting. So, for example, in the name of multiculturalism, you very often get councils building separate Muslim community centres and de facto white community centres. Well, that's not why I want immigrants here. I want immigrants here because they enrich the culture. I don't want immigrants here because they can sit separately in a box, and live apart. That's not the mixing liberalism that I want to see. So I think that is a good illustration of why we need to have a much clearer focus on the language we use, because by using the concept of multiculturalism and the word in a sloppy way, we actually end up creating real victims, and it puts good, decent, liberal people into alliance with the most reactionary parts of Muslim communities against the people in the Muslim communities we should be siding with, who are the women who want change, who are the gay people who want change, and all sorts of other, and the good men who don't want to be abusing women and gay people.
Thank you.
Is that a happy thought, Tony?
Thank you.